Hello and welcome to another episode in the texture series. In the post-production part, and tileable textures are today's theme. Just in Lightroom, the image that I have selected and shortly what quality we had. I export this here at 16-bit as integer. And it was profiled, of course. Here I mark all the spots that will show up like a Thor thumb in a tile texture, and then I find here my area where I think I have maybe some material, and of course I copy and paste this out so I have a smaller one, and I select here some patches. And as you might notice already, I have pre-recorded this because some of these clips are sped up 10 times to waste no time here. So what I'm doing here is, of course, to create the patches. That means I create a mask and then I try to find out where I can just paint stuff away. And that is mostly in the dark areas, because when we have a green hatch, any dark spot will be the most dominant part in the tiled texture, because everything else is in green. And so I try to punch in some holes where it's dark and so on. And this gives me finally all the quality that I want to have, that I do not got from the hatch by itself as it is, even if it was already a good start here. So after I have done my work here in filling out all these dark areas, I go now ahead with a copy and go to offset. And I take here two values for horizontal and vertical, and that gives me finally here some borders inside of the image. And I have to fix these borders, of course, with brush again, with some dynamics and scattering, so it doesn't show up very much. And the idea with the offset is, of course, that anything that was in the middle before is now splitted to the edges. So these borders, these new borders, are now compatible. When I go to the right side, they continue on the left side. So they are seamlessly tileable already. And on the end, I can put this back. I don't need so, but it's then nice to go back so I know always where I was in the first place. And I check this here out. I do this more than often, and the simplest way is, of course, normally you use the same offset values than a negative to get back. I copy this here now, and I use then the pattern fill, and this is a very fast method to see if I have some repetitions in it. And you will have always some kind of repetition in it, because if you really get everything out, the textures may be pretty boring after a while. So it's always hard to find the exact balance. And what I'm doing here is to create a little trick for Cinema 4D. I took my largest patch here, and this time I take care mostly about here these edges around. I want to have an alpha channel. And when you think about these repetitive parts in the texture, then we can create, of course, a little disturbance in it, as a natural texture would be in terms of a hatch, for example. And we can place then these patches randomly on top of the texture in Cinema 4D. And I want to show you that, of course, how this works in a minute, roughly said. And so we can see here already some progress. I have a mask. I save this mask here as alpha. I do not need to write in alpha, but it's nicer to have that, of course, always in the way we want, in the right naming convention. I save this out here, and then I can use this, of course, directly in Cinema 4D. So I take here a plane in Cinema 4D and I give this 5x5 segments. I might change this later. I call up a material. I put this into the luminance just to avoid any light disturbances here at the moment, just for the tutorial. You can use it in any channel where it makes sense. And so here we have it attached to the plane. I increase here the preview. That is not needed, of course. I set it to 3x3 tiles, and you might notice already a little repetition in it. And that is of course the reason why we go one step further here, and I name here my UV tag. Of course, it's always a good method to have everything individually named, to have maybe not 500 UV tags just named UV. So I take here my little patch inside of a second material, and I go then with that material into the alpha channel, which is instantly accepted, but I switch it off just to make here a faster workflow. It's not needed, of course. And then I go here and name this. Again, good naming conventions is always a good idea. And from there I attach this material. Then I go here to the tags, and in the selection I put an X in. That could be any letter that is not used for any selection, so I can switch off the texture without losing any information in it. And here I rename the UV tag to UVW patch, and then adjust a little render to see what we got here. And then I go already to UV edit, and here I want to see, of course, my UV mesh and my texture here, and that's not given to me because it's not loaded, and that is by default to not overrun the RAM inside of your application when you have thousands of textures in it. So here I have now my patch, and with the right UV mesh I select all the UV polygons here and I move them out, and you can see I have instantly an effect here. And so I put this out, and I have to go here to the material because it's set to tile. This is nothing that I want to have for the next steps here, because that could be very counterproductive. So I have to click here and one more, so to come to the tags, and I go to tile and switch it off. So now I can't see anything, otherwise it would have been a repetition endlessly. So when I select now here, for example, 4 of these polygons, then I can move these on my picture, and with the next step I could use also shortcuts, of course, but it's always nicer for tutorials to show where the tools are. I can scale, move, and I can of course rotate these guys, but in this case I avoid rotating them. Select some more, maybe here this time 3 by 3, then with the E key I can move them, and with the T key or with this icon here I can scale it up. I can scale also non-uniformly, but I would also avoid this, like I avoid rotating here. So a little bit smaller, and I go back. And again, keep in mind we have an alpha channel on it switched off, but at the moment we are more targeting the positions where we want to have this stuff. And I do this here now pretty randomly, just to give you an idea how it works. And normally you should know where to place those things here, because then you have maybe an easier life to overcome the repetition of the tiling. And so I do this here a few times more. I know most people avoid UV, that is why I put a lot of space here into this tutorial. And it's really something that can work to your advantage in a huge way, because nothing is easier than when you have it down to just place the texture wherever you want. And here I miss one polygon, of course, but I scale this up and or down as you like. And then I have already here 4 patches from one texture, very efficient. And this wraps it up here already for this. So I go back to startup, and then I go back to my material, I go to my alpha channel, and you can see it's not that simple to see here. So I can't see here a thing. What happens here? A typical mistake, and I'm happy that we have that. I haven't cut this out, so we can fix this here on the fly, because if you hit that wall, you want to know how it works. First of all, I check here my overall image, and then I go here to my alpha channel, click here again, drag this over. If there was a mistake, it wasn't, so I go to select, go to alpha channel here, click on that little chip, press OK, and there is my alpha channel. Just a little glitch, happens from time to time. And now you can see I have here a totally different scale in it. And of course that is easy to fix here with the tiles, which of course counteracts the purpose here to tile everything. But you could easily also open the texture now and change the texture size or fill it with something else, and the UV structure stays exactly in the same way. So I want to show you where they are, so I invert here just for a second the whole thing. Here are my patches, just in negative over the top, and I have done this because I can't really notice or see them anymore when they are in the right scale. So, and here I stay already in my second example, and again I make my first little notes here to see what I can use. This is more that I do it for you, so you can see where my thought process are. And then I take one little patch as before and some other little guys here to get maybe something that helps me to finally fill in the edges that I have for my setting everything to offset. And again, the edges that I have now here, they are endless, so they are tileable, but in the middle, that crossing, I have to fix this, and when I set the offset back, if I like so, then I have a complete tileable texture here. And the whole process is of course a lot of painting here in this way, because there's no real structure in it, and I can't be as sloppy as with the hedge, because the parts are bigger and they have more contrast, and you recognize these stones much more. And I have used here a very small part of the whole wall, and to make a tileable texture out of it is of course not really the way I would suggest it. And one word about tileable textures. It's normally done so you can take maybe 1.5 or perhaps even 2 times the tile. Tileable textures are most of the time, except when they are really, really unique, they are not used for 5, 6 or even 10 times the tiling. That looks always very artificial, and you need these little patches to give this a little bit more life. And here I use some of the stones, and I fix everything here with brushes and with the stamp tool. And I will show you later on as well that I take here as the burn and the dodge tool to give the stones a little bit shadow and a little bit light on the edges. And whatever would stick out, I try to fix this here. And the brush is sometimes my helper, sometimes the stamp tool in 50 or 30%. And so I try to find here my way through to give this an appearance as if everything would have been there in the first place. And so I go here with the burn tool and put some light here on the edges and go over it again. And it's more painting here at the moment what I'm doing. And on the end, I want to have a seamless tileable texture here. And that is of course pretty close here to be finished. I save this, I check here my tiles. And then I go already here into Cinema 4D with that file. And from there again in the luminance channel, just for the speed and not to set up any light sources. And now I tile this here, and you can see the bigger stones, they are pretty visible here. And with the way I have painted it, I should just cut these parts in 3 or 4 smaller stones. And what I'm doing here is to show you that we have of course our attention to the actor or to another object, and that tileable textures are most of the time not the main actor here. I have shown this wall here before, and I have shown you as well how we can just offset only one layer of bricks, which is sometimes very important when you want to have a very clean created wall. When you have an eye for all of that, then sometimes a sloppily built wall is not really something that appeals to most people, because everyone has a different experience with brick layering or with the art of getting a structure inside. And so you have to take care about this. Speaking of which, I want to use here something that has really all the problems in the world in it. Perhaps I missed some, but this is a very old texture. And as you can see here, we have as well an image that doesn't follow really the idea that I have presented here so far. It uses a wide angle lens, so we have a lot of distortion in it. And it has no gray cards, no Macbeth chart in use, so it's really a blind or an instrument flight here. And as you can see, it's really distorted. That means the quality that we get here out of it is already limited to roughly 50% because I have to correct all of this. And I want to focus here, of course, on one specific area, and that here is in the middle, where I have even nice edge solutions, which I can use later on to create maybe some nice details. So my main part is, of course, the middle field, and so I make a copy, and I want to do a lens distortion repair here. And to do this, I have to go here to my lens correction. And the idea here is to get the most out of it. But first, you can see it's an old picture. It's really old. The application has not even an idea that the camera exists at all at any time. So I have to go to custom. So worst case here in part number 2. And the first thing that I need to do here is to create my grid. So I have some reference here, because that is exactly what we want to have. And please have an eye, of course, on the borders, but more importantly on the middle field here, because that is all we care about. So here is not really a sign, but you can see the icon changes, so we can fine-tune the angle, which is the first thing that I want to do, because we are a little bit out of center here for this middle part, and to get this faster into a straight conversation, we will get this. Because in the moment I use here just the remove distortion, I see that the line above has a moustache distortion. That means it goes in and out and in and out. That is worst case par excellence, of course. And as we go here just with all these tools into the game to get the middle field out, I have my eyes only on these guys here in the middle, just straight. And this is the only rectangle that I want to have here. So having said that, I play here a little bit more around, and I do not explain too much, but the perspective in horizontal or vertical has, of course, out of the center always a little bit an angle problem, so it's in back and forth. And when we do this, after a while we will get the top layer here in our rectangle straight and the lower one. The vertical lines are important as well, but I would think they are secondary, because the most important part is that we get the horizontal lines very straight. And when we have this, perhaps we take an eye on this, but when we come very close with the vertical lines, I would prefer to have the horizontal lines 100%. And when we have this in the best way, we want to have, of course, the chromatic aberration that we find maybe in a picture as well, eliminated in one step. We try to get any changes of the whole picture in as little steps as possible, and that is the beauty of that lens correction tool here, as we can do all of that in one step. And we don't want to do this in several steps, because each time we lose a little bit quality. This is a size lens, by the way, so it's not a bad or a cheap class here. But the sensor is like a pinky fingernail. It was one of the first 8 megapixel cameras, and so it has some problems. And that is why I choose this image here, because I have no idea how to create those stuff today anymore with the more modern classes and full frame cameras. So we can tweak here a little bit, but keep in mind, in the moment we take here the green and magenta spill out, we change here the colorization of the whole picture, and that is certainly not a good idea to do this over the top just because we can. We have to find a point where we can live with, and that maybe is the main target here. So I think that looks nice. We get here our straight lines back to most of the time. And now I want to put your attention to the little histogram here. You can see that all these pixels here change. There's pretty much no single pixel that stays where it is. And as the movement is certainly not exactly 1 pixel to the left or 1 pixel up or both, it's mostly something between. Every pixel mixes with its neighbor, and that reduces the quality. Of course, there are plugins available. I have mentioned this more than often. Deconvolution is the name for that. They are available since years. Photoshop CC7 might finally get this as well as the main plugin or the main new feature in. I use from Topaz in Focus and it works pretty nicely. It's not expensive and easy to use. Okay, so we have now here our square, and I try to find out which size I want to take, and with the rectangle selection that's not an easy task. So I use here the Command R and use my guides here, because that's way more relaxing to find finally what we need. It's not just a simple rectangle that we want to have. First of all, we need the layer from the top and from the bottom that we cut exactly inside of that. And then again, we need to understand prick layering, because we don't want to have super short or super long pricks in our tile. So how can we do this? And of course, with a little trick, we get this pretty fast established. And the simplest way is, of course, just to go here. First, to adjust these guys a little bit more. So we eyeball the left and the right. Go to the pattern, compare the size, the half here and then the other one here. And they have really mixed all these things heavily. And then we can take here maybe one stone, and as it is a German wall, it should be 24 centimeters here. Then we move this and then we cut this part away, and then we have here measurement what we should have on the right side here. So okay, I got my idea here. I can tweak this a little bit more, and then I think I'm pretty much done. And I have used here, of course, something where we have introduced already a little mistake, and I want to show that later on. But for now, I want to show how easily we can get something in such a short time that needs a fix again. So the new one, I love to have zeros or even numbers, because in the moment I ever need to rotate this, Photoshop is not very well in rotating with odd numbers. Even numbers have a clear middle point, and then no mixing of pixels happens. It's an old habit of mine. So this time I set this up here with offset 512, just because the numbers fit, and we can see the seams. We can see that the layers, the horizontal one, works nicely, but we see also the color shift here. And we can see something else that is not really in the way we want, and I come to this in a second. So I press here OK. I'm fine with the result that we have so far. And here we have the vertical connections between the stones, and this is a big no, because normally they have to be as far apart as possible, so the force from the whole house or the building goes easily through the stones. And when we have these guys, that's normally the first step to have cracks in the wall. So we have to set this here one layer up to fix this, and then we have to shrink, of course, our whole area, because we miss one layer here. That's easily fixable. I cut everything away that we had moved outside, and then I can use here, of course, the merge visible. I get here my mask, and this mask has then all the data that I really want to have. And to make it simpler, I go into a new picture. And this is now the problem for the next tutorial. Thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.